Go ahead and hit subscribe, like, and comment, because once you step inside this story, there's no turning back. The silence you're about to hear is louder than screams. The transport van didn't slow down when it crossed the parish line. Blue lights flashed against the swamp trees, slicing through the thick fog like knives. The tires hissed on wet asphalt as the convoy pushed forward, faster than protocol allowed, faster than comfort demanded. Inside that reinforced van, 6 men sat shackled, ankles chained to the floor, wrists locked tight. Every single one of them had the same destination on paper, and every one of them was supposed to arrive alive. Only 5 did. By the time the convoy reached the outer gate of Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola, 1 inmate was slumped sideways, chin pressed hard against his chest, his skin already losing its color. His name was Marcus Delacroix, age 42, convicted of a double homicide, sentenced to die. There was no sign of a struggle. No blood. Just a body that refused to wake up. The official report would later describe it as medical distress during transfer. But the guard who unlocked the van door knew better. He'd heard Delacroix breathing just 30 minutes earlier. Heavy. Uneven. Afraid. And on death row, fear is a form of currency. Detective Evelyn Carter arrived before sunrise. The prison loomed in front of her, an ocean of razor wire and concrete stretching into the mist. Angola wasn't just a prison. It was a city of the condemned, built on old plantation land where suffering had been harvested for centuries. Death row sat at its heart, quiet and sealed off, a place where men waited years to die and learned to listen to every sound that wasn't meant for them. Carter had worked violent crimes for 15 years. She'd seen bodies in alleyways, basements, and bayous. But prison deaths were different. They came wrapped in policy, buried under paperwork, and protected by an unspoken rule. What happens inside, stays inside. She stepped into the intake bay where the transport van still idled, its engine rumbling softly. The air smelled of diesel and disinfectant, a sterile attempt to cover the decay. A medic stood nearby, arms crossed, staring at the floor. Time of death? Carter asked, her voice cutting through the quiet. The medic hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the van before landing back on the concrete. 4:52 a.m. And when was he last responsive? Another pause. Unknown. That word again. Unknown. It showed up way too often in cases like this. Delacroix's body lay on a gurney under the harsh fluorescent lights of the intake bay. His wrists were still cuffed. His eyes were half open, fixed on nothing. Carter leaned closer, her gaze sweeping over him, and that's when she saw it. Faint redness around his neck, not bruising, not quite. Subtle pressure marks. Like someone had pressed something there, hard enough to block his air, but not long enough to leave obvious damage. She straightened up slowly, her mind already connecting the dots. This wasn't a heart attack, she said, more to herself than to anyone else in the room. No one answered her. The silence was its own reply. Marcus Delacroix wasn't supposed to matter. On paper, he was already dead. Another name on death row. Another file stacked in a cabinet labeled closed cases. But Carter had learned early in her career that the people society forgets are often the ones holding the most dangerous secrets. And Delacroix had secrets. She pulled his transfer history, and the files told a story the official reports tried to hide. He'd been transferred 3 times in 2 years. That alone was highly unusual. Death row inmates don't get moved around like that unless there's a very good reason. Court appearances, security threats, or something the administration didn't want sitting in one place for too long. She scanned the documents, and the pattern made her stomach tighten. Every single transfer lined up with a grievance filed by Delacroix. Complaints about guards. About intimidation. About being pressured to keep quiet regarding something he overheard in the infirmary late one night. The names were blacked out in the records, redacted into oblivion, but one chilling phrase wasn't. She read it aloud under her breath. They removing people who know too much. Delacroix wasn't just another inmate who died in transit. He was a loose end. Someone had silenced him before he could speak. Carter now stood in the middle of a fortress designed to keep people in, but she was looking for a killer who was already on the inside. A killer protected by walls, by badges, and by a code of silence more powerful than any lock. The question wasn't just who killed Marcus Delacroix, but why. What had he heard in that infirmary that was worth a man's life? And how many other people knew? This wasn't just a murder investigation anymore. It was a race to uncover a conspiracy before more people ended up silenced forever. What do you think happened? Drop your theories in the comments below. And make sure you're subscribed, because this case is far from closed. Thanks for watching. I looked up from the file, my eyes drawn to the long, silent hallway that stretched deep into the prison. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was deliberate, heavy. Warden Thomas Breer greeted me in his office with a smile that belonged on a campaign poster. He was tall, silver-haired, his uniform so pristine it looked like it was starched with authority. The kind of man who had spent a lifetime mastering the art of unshakable calm. Behind him, the wall was a shrine to his career. Framed commendations for years of service, institutional excellence, and zero tolerance for misconduct. "Detective Carter," he said, his voice warm and smooth. "An unfortunate situation." "Convenient timing," I shot back. His smile didn't waver. "I assure you, we take inmate health very seriously." "Seriously enough to move them in the middle of the night?" I asked, leaning in. "Seriously enough to completely ignore standard transport procedures?" Warden Breer calmly folded his hands on his desk. "Transfers happen when they need to happen, Detective." "Then why wasn't this transfer logged with the department until after the inmate was already dead?" For just a fraction of a second, something shifted in his eyes. It wasn't fear. It was calculation. "Death row is a sensitive environment," he said, choosing his words with care. "We don't publicize movements. It's for everyone's safety." "Including whose safety?" I pressed. The warden stood up, signaling the end of our conversation. "You'll have our full cooperation, Detective. Within reason." Within reason. Just another one of those phrases I'd learned means I'll give you nothing. The first break in the case came that afternoon. An anonymous call, the voice distorted and frantic. "You're looking at the wrong death." Before I could even ask a question, the line went dead. By evening, I had my second surprise. One of Delacroix's former cell neighbors, an inmate named Leon Baptiste, was suddenly reported missing from his housing unit. He hadn't escaped. He wasn't transferred. He was just gone. The guard shrugged it off as a simple clerical error. I demanded the surveillance footage. Funny enough, I was told the cameras in that section had been down for maintenance. Of course, they were. That night, I sat alone in my cheap motel room, files and documents spread across the bed. I started mapping out recent inmate transfers, drawing lines with a red pen, connecting names, dates, and facilities. A pattern started to emerge. It was subtle, but it was there. Inmates who had filed official complaints. Inmates who had spoken to journalists. Inmates who had requested new lawyers, claiming they had dirt on internal corruption within the prison system. 3 of them were now dead. 1 was missing. And 1, according to a sealed document I definitely wasn't supposed to have, was scheduled for a transfer in 48 hours. His name was Daniel Price. Price had been on death row for 12 years for killing a state trooper. He'd lost all his appeals. But 6 months ago, he sent a letter to the Attorney General's office. He was requesting protective custody, claiming he had knowledge of illegal actions during death row transfers. His request was denied. I stared at Price's mugshot. His eyes were sharp, alert. He didn't look like a man resigned to his fate. He looked like a man who was still fighting. Just then, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "If you want the truth, come to the old intake wing. Alone. Midnight." I glanced at the clock. It was 11:32 p.m. outside. A low rumble of thunder rolled over the prison grounds. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my jacket, my badge, and my gun. Whatever was happening inside Angola prison, it was bigger than one dead inmate. As I stepped out into the stormy night, I had a sinking feeling that these silent, middle-of-the-night moves weren't just about hiding bodies. They were about erasing witnesses. When I reached the locked door of the abandoned intake wing, I forced it open. The smell that hit me wasn't dust or mold. It was the metallic, unmistakable scent of fresh blood. And I could hear something from the darkness inside. Someone was still alive. Thanks for watching. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. The door creaked open, just enough for Detective Evelyn Carter to slip inside. The old intake wing had been shut down for years, sealed off after flooding and budget cuts. The lights didn't work. The air was damp and heavy, carrying a metallic scent she knew all too well. Blood. Fresh enough to still speak. "Police," she whispered. knowing the word was useless here. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across peeling paint and rusted benches. It stopped on a hand, moving weakly on the floor. Leon Baptiste was alive. Barely. He lay against the wall, his prison uniform soaked through at the abdomen, eyes wide with panic. His wrists were cuffed behind him, not with standard restraints, but with cheap, disposable zip ties. Untraceable. "They're coming back," he gasped. Carter knelt beside him. "Who?" Baptiste swallowed hard. "The ones who move us. The ones you don't see on the schedule." Faint sirens wailed in the distance, but they weren't for this wing. No one knew she was here. Baptiste coughed, blood flecking his lips. Delacroix didn't die in that van. They finished him after. A cold pressure settled in Carter's chest. Finished him how? "He talked," Baptiste said, his voice a strained whisper. "About the list." "What list?" Baptiste's eyes flicked toward the dark hallway behind her. The names of inmates marked for transfer, and the names of the people getting paid to make sure they don't survive it. Before Carter could ask another question, footsteps echoed down the hall. Not hurried. Not panicked. Controlled. She killed her flashlight and pressed herself against the wall, her gun drawn. Two shadows crossed the far doorway, their voices low, disturbingly familiar. Corrections officers. Not outsiders. This was an inside job. Baptiste's breathing turned ragged. His eyes locked on Carter's, pleading. She gave a slight shake of her head, a silent command to stay quiet. The shadows passed without stopping, their footsteps fading into the oppressive silence. Once they were gone, Carter quickly cut the zip ties and called for medical backup from a burner phone she carried for moments exactly like this. By the time paramedics arrived, Baptiste had lost consciousness. As they loaded him onto the stretcher, Carter noticed something tucked inside his waistband. A folded scrap of paper, damp with blood. She slipped it into her pocket, unseen. By morning, the prison was on total lockdown. No media. No visitors. No explanations. The official statement claimed an inmate-on-inmate assault in a restricted area. Baptiste was listed as critical but stable. Carter knew better than to trust that phrasing. In a place like Angola, stable didn't mean safe. She sat in her car outside the towering prison gates, the early morning light casting long shadows. She unfolded the blood-stained paper. It wasn't a list of names. It was a schedule. Dates. Times. Transport routes. Facility codes. And next to several entries, a single letter had been circled in red ink. T. Carter ran the routes through her system. Each one matched a transfer that had ended in a death, a sudden medical emergency, or an unexplained disappearance. The letter T wasn't random. It stood for termination. This wasn't just a few corrupt guards. This was a calculated, systematic execution ring operating from within the prison walls. Her phone rang, flashing an unknown number again. She answered. "You found Baptiste," a calm voice said. No distortion this time. Male. Older. A southern accent, softened by years of authority. "Who is this?" Carter asked, her hand tightening on the steering wheel. "Someone trying to keep you alive longer than Delacroix." The call ended. The dial tone buzzed in her ear, a stark contrast to the pounding of her own heart. She looked back at the prison, a concrete fortress hiding a rot that went deeper than she could have ever imagined. And now, she was part of it. The question wasn't just who was on the list, but who was next. And how many more had to die before she could expose the truth. If you want to see what happens next, make sure to subscribe. Daniel Price was moved into isolation that afternoon. No notice. No paperwork. No explanation. Carter pushed through every channel she had to see him, citing an active homicide investigation. After hours of resistance, the warden finally gave in, but with conditions. 2 guards present. 10 minutes only. Price sat behind reinforced glass, his hands folded, his expression impossible to read. He looked thinner than his photo, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. "You're late," he said. Carter ignored him. "You asked for protection." "Why?" "Because I saw how the transfers really work," Price replied. "And because I know who signs off on them." "That's a serious accusation." A faint smile touched Price's lips. "So is execution." He leaned closer to the glass. "They don't kill us randomly. They move us when someone on the outside needs a problem solved. A lawsuit. A witness. a liability. Death row is convenient. Everyone expects us to die anyway. The weight of his words hit Carter like a physical blow. Who is they? Price shook his head. Names get you killed. Patterns get you answers. Before she could press him, one of the guards shifted. Carter saw his hand hovering near his baton. The 10 minutes were up. As she stood to leave, Price spoke again, his voice just a whisper. If I'm transferred tonight, you're already too late. That evening, Baptiste died. The official cause was complications from internal bleeding. No autopsy was ordered. When Carter heard the news, she slammed her fist against her steering wheel. Baptiste, silenced just hours after talking to her. It was clear this network's reach extended far beyond the prison walls. She drove straight to her office and pulled the records for every death row transfer from the past 5 years. She worked through the night, cross-referencing them with internal disciplinary actions, grievance filings, and pending civil cases. As the data came together, a horrifying picture emerged. This wasn't just a few row guards. This was a system. Transfers were being used as executions outside the courtroom, a way to silence inmates who threatened to expose misconduct, excessive force, falsified reports, even evidence tampering in capital cases. And someone at the very top was pulling the strings. The letter T kept appearing. Termination, transfer, and Thomas Breer, the warden. Just after midnight, an alert pinged on her computer. Daniel Price had been removed from his cell. Destination unknown. No transport was logged, no escort listed. Carter grabbed her keys and ran. Rain hammered the windshield as she sped toward the prison, the road ahead a blurry mess. She felt like she was racing ghosts, chasing a machine designed to erase its own mistakes in silence. When she arrived, the gates were already closed, blocked by armed guards. Emergency transfer, one of them said flatly. Stand down, detective. Carter stared past him into the prison's dark interior. She could almost hear the low rumble of a van engine, another silent transfer already in motion. She looked at the guard's face, searching for a flicker of doubt, a hint of fear. She found nothing. As she turned back to her car, her phone buzzed one last time. It was a message. If Price doesn't make it, neither will the truth. Attached was a photo. Daniel Price, shackled inside a transport van. He was alive. For now. And scrawled across the image, in the same red ink Baptiste had used, was a single word, tomorrow. The call came at 2:17 a.m. I was already on my feet when I answered, my heart pounding before a single word was spoken. After years on the force, I knew that calls this late never meant good news. They meant things were getting worse. They've activated a fallback transfer, a calm, older voice said. I recognized it. The same voice from the anonymous tips that had started this whole mess. Price isn't the target anymore. My grip tightened on the phone. Then who is? The silence that followed was deliberate, a cold, calculated pause meant to let the dread sink in. You. The line went dead. I didn't hesitate. I didn't call for backup. I just drove. The highway to Angola was a black ribbon slick with rain, the streaks on my windshield looking like veins. My destination was the Louisiana State Penitentiary, a place where secrets go to die. My phone lit up again. It wasn't the mystery caller this time, but an internal alert from a trusted contact inside corrections. Emergency staff relocation. Authorization code T77. My blood ran cold. Staff. Not inmates. They weren't just moving prisoners anymore. They were silencing anyone who got too close. This was a whole new level of dangerous. The game had changed, and I was now a player, whether I wanted to be or not. Arriving at Angola, the air was thick with tension. It felt different, wrong. Unmarked armed units patrolled the corridors, their movements precise and unnerving. Doors to offices that had stood open for decades were now locked tight. Men in suits were boxing up files, hauling them away under the weak excuse of a compliance review. I flashed my badge at every checkpoint, pushing my way through the organized chaos, my gut screaming that I was running out of time. I had to get to the records, had to find the proof before it was erased forever. I burst into the records office just as two men were loading the last of the file crates onto a dolly. Step away from the files, I commanded, my voice shaking with adrenaline. One of them flinched, but the other met my gaze with cold indifference. Without a word, he shoved the cart with all his might. It tipped, and boxes crashed to the floor. Paperwork exploded into the air, scattering like a flock of startled birds. I dropped to my knees, frantically grabbing at the documents. Transfer forms, medical overrides. And then I saw it. A thick document, bound and stamped in red. Execution Management Protocol, internal use only. My stomach twisted into a knot as I read. This wasn't about transferring inmates. This was a blueprint for murder, sanitized by bureaucracy. It detailed every horrific step. The specific sedation dosages to be administered during transport. The precise time windows where a sudden cardiac arrest could be conveniently blamed on a pre-existing condition. It even had scripts for the guards, telling them how to phrase their radio calls, how to log the deaths so the reports would never trigger an alarm. It was a cold, efficient system for killing people and making it look legal. At the bottom of every single page, 2 signatures. One was Thomas Breer, the warden. But above his was a higher clearance signature, belonging to a state-level oversight committee chair. This conspiracy went far beyond the prison walls. It reached the highest levels of power, into offices with flags and polished mahogany desks. I was so absorbed in the horror of the documents, I didn't hear the footsteps approaching from behind. The blow came without warning, a sharp, blinding pain at the back of my head. The world tilted, my vision swimming as I crashed to the floor. Strong hands seized my arms, yanking me upright. A voice, low and menacing, whispered in my ear. You were warned. You should have stopped when it was just about the dead. Darkness began to close in around me, but one thought burned through the haze. They had made a mistake. They hadn't silenced me. They had just shown me exactly who I needed to hunt. This was far from over. If you want to see what happens next in this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss a thing. They dragged me into a service corridor I'd never seen before, past a door ironically marked transfer hold, temporary. Inside, the lights were already on. And there he was, Daniel Price, restrained to a chair, a thin line of blood tracing his brow. His voice was a rasp. They moved me again. Guess I wasn't quiet enough. I struggled against the arms holding me back, my voice shaking with rage. You won't get away with this. The man behind me just laughed, a low, confident sound. We already have. He moved into the light, holding a small medical device. This will all be explained as exhaustion, he said, his voice eerily calm. A detective who became obsessed couldn't step back from the job. Price lunged against his restraints, his eyes wild. She's not on your list. The man just smiled, meeting his gaze. She is now. Just then, the door exploded open. Shouts echoed off the concrete walls. Federal agents swarmed the room, weapons raised, their command sharp and absolute. The man holding me let go and tried to run, but he didn't get far. I crumpled to the floor, gasping for air, the room spinning around me. Through the chaos, I saw agents freeing Price. He stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief. You planned this, he whispered. I just shook my head. I hoped. The lead agent stepped forward, his expression grim. We traced the fallback authorization. It led us right here. His eyes swept over the documents scattered across the room. And now, he said, picking one up, we have what we need. The fallout was immediate and devastating. Arrests dominoed outwards, far beyond the prison walls. Guards, administrators, consultants, anyone who had signed off on a transfer without a second thought was taken into custody. The entire oversight committee was dissolved. All executions across the country were suspended, pending a full federal review. As for Thomas Breer, the man at the center of it all, he was found unresponsive in his cell. The official report called it self-inflicted. I never bore it. Months later, I watched as Daniel Price sat in a federal courtroom, his death sentence finally vacated. A retrial was ordered. Evidence that had been suppressed for years suddenly saw the light of day. Testimony that had once seemed airtight was now being challenged. His case became a catalyst, prying open dozens of others that had been sealed shut forever. I testified for hours. My voice never wavered, and the tailored jacket I wore hid the last of my injuries. It felt like justice, finally, had found its leverage. But I knew leverage could still fail. That night, an envelope was waiting on my desk. No return address. Inside was a single photocopy. The Execution Management Protocol, revised. Different signatures. Different state. But the same red letter stamped in the corner. I leaned back in my chair, the heavy truth settling into my bones. We hadn't destroyed the system. We had only peeled back one layer. Somewhere out there, another transfer was being arranged. Another name was being selected. Another life was quietly being placed on a schedule. I closed the file. There was no stepping away from this. Because once you truly hear the silence behind these moves, you can never unhear it. And if you're still here, still listening to this story, stay close. The next name might already be written. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories from the shadows.